So I wanted to start with a personal, actually, and to ask everybody to reflect on a personal moment with Prince, if you happen to actually know him, or if you didn't know him, to reflect on a personal memory, maybe the first time that you heard his music, a particular song or album that impacted you in a personal way, and kind of take it from there. So, Amir, do you want to start? I think you got a bunch of personal moments.
Yeah. My introduction to Prince was really, really eerie. To cut it short, my father was trying to figure out a way to break to my mother that my grandfather just died. And having never seen my mother have a breakdown like that, I mean, at the time I was 6, I remember that my sister wanted to take me away from that environment, leave them in the kitchen alone to talk. And I didn't understand why my mom was having this outburst. So my sister instantly took me to the family library and put these, we had a giant speaker system and these headphones. It was the 70s. She just put the radio on, basically to silence, me hearing my mom crying over her father. And I distinctly remember it was the summer of 1978. I think at the time on DAS, the DJ was just playing Street Wave by the Brothers Johnson from the Blam album. And right after that, they premiered Soft and Wet.
For you.
So still hearing my mom crying, and I just remember that moment more than anything, of her having this breakdown. But me hearing Soft and Wet for the first time, I mean, it didn't make an impact. I was instantly a fan, but I'll never forget that day. That's like one of the 6 childhood memories I remember verbatim. So that was kind of my introduction to Prince. And for the longest, he was the soundtrack to my mom crying hysterically. That's all I remembered. Eventually, when I became 11, I became a fan of my own right. But, that's how I was introduced.
Kimbra?
So I was born in 1990, and I came to Prince a bit later. I first heard musicology, and I remember it was Juice TV in New Zealand was our kind of music video, channel. And I was like, who is this? I'd heard Prince before, but I didn't know all the big hits. I was so compelled by the music video that came with musicology. And I remember it was around the time I was 14 years old, so I was starting to buy my own records with my own pocket money. And I bought that album. And I was absolutely obsessed with it. Call My Name was my favorite off that record after musicology, and that was my intro into the ballads of Prince, which is still kind of the closest to my heart. And then I went into For You and started doing the whole discography from that point. But musicology was my entrance point, which is a little different to other people. But wow, those are the strongest memories for me in early days.
I should also say, so when you won the Grammy...
Yeah, well, that's a very personal
experience.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, I've been lucky to have, I guess, 2 interactions with Prince that are close to my heart. Of course, the moment of him actually acknowledging me directly for a contribution I made on a song was just, I mean, to win this Grammy was amazing, but I just couldn't get over the fact that my idol was standing next to me and had just looked at me. And all I could say when I got on the mic for a kind of thank you speech was to thank Prince, because he was the original innovator, the father of funk music for me, the father of vocal inspiration for me. So none of it would exist really without him. He also heard the Golden Echo, my last record, and my friend Janelle Monáe reached out to let me know that his favorite song was Carolina, and he wanted me to know that. So that's extremely personal, that he sat down and put the record on, and yeah, that's very meaningful to me.
Anthony?
Well, I heard about Prince years and years before I even understood what he was doing as a musician. It was so far past what I could imagine in my head to create controversy. I thought it was saying hurt your boop boop, woman part. And I couldn't understand why they would let him play this on the radio. So being a musician, I met a lot of people, and I used to sing background with D'Angelo. So we were invited to go over to Prince's house. Remember, we're supposed to go over and hang out. But back then he was no meat, no drinking, no nothing. So D'Angelo was like, forget that, we're not going. Remember, he shut it down. So after that, him becoming a fan of my music, after the big award shows, Grammys or any, there's always a jam session. So I walk in, my first time being invited, personally. This guy's on drums. On keys, we had Stevie Wonder and a whole lot of people inside. Yeah, that night. So that was the first time actually really meeting him. And he comes up to me and say, "You want to make some noise?" Sure. So ever since then, I've been rocking with him, and he's been a big fan of mine, and I was a big fan of his. And we actually jammed there about 8 times at his house.
Thanks, Anthony. Spike.
Well, we wanted Malcolm X to be 3 hours. Those motherfuckers at Warner Brothers said no. And I said, okay. So they fired all the post-production people and said, finish the film the way you want to, because we're not giving you any more money for post-production. And, had to be a student of Malcolm X to, in order to do that film. And Malcolm always talked about self-reliance and self-determination. And those two 4 words kept hearing them in my head. And I said, I know some black folks that got some money. And Prince was one of the people I called to give me money to finish Malcolm X. Wow. And
Did you know him at the time?
yeah, I knew him.
You knew him.
How I was gonna call him? Nah, I mean,
Cold call.
here's the thing though. Everybody I called had to know. Tracy Chapman, Janet Jackson, Prince. There's a Kate Oprah Winfrey, and last, then Bill Cosby. Before anybody knew anything, this is back in what year was this? 92. So, not giving that money back. And very quickly gave it to last person was the two last people were, and also I'm hurrying, but every person I would ask, I was asking for more money. I was getting like, yo, I'm gonna ask this. So I asked that person, I asked more the next person. So the last 2 people were Magic Johnson. So Magic gave high to the last person. Forget the order. But the last person was Michael Jordan. And I just said, you know how much Magic gave? And Michael's competitive, so he said, Magic gave that? There you go. Boom. So Prince is one of all those African Americans that came together so we could finish continuing the post-production Malcolm X. And all of them made me promise to never disclose how much the amount was, which I'll bring to my grave. And we kept it quiet. And on Malcolm X's birthday, we have an announcement at the Schomburg Library, 135th Street in Lenox. All these African Americans came forward. And the next day, Warner Brothers started funding the movie again. Prince is one of them.
Alan Light.
Musically, since it just seems like he was always such a piece of my life, it's hard to answer that. From holding up the cassette player to record the first time they played When Doves Cry on the radio when they were going to premiere it at midnight, catching that so I could bring it to high school the next day, to how important his music was to bonding early on with my wife, talking about old Prince records and shows, or when he played that guitar solo at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that we've all been watching. I was about 10 feet in front of the stage, standing on a chair and screaming my head off. But I guess what I think of is the first time that I met him. I met him for what became a cover story for Vibe magazine. It was the first interview he had done in a bunch of years, and so it was a long process of kind of feeling me out and making sure he wanted to do it. And the first time I met him was at a sound check for a show in San Francisco, and he brought me on stage. And I'm trying to not lose every piece of my sanity that I had. And so he parked me on the side of the stage, and he was leading the band and playing all this crazy stuff. And he'd come over and talk to me. And at one point he's playing a solo, and while he's still playing, he comes over and he says, "You see how hard it is when you can play anything that you want to, when you can play anything that you hear?" Now, some of that was just showing off. Some of that was just, establishing dominance in a situation, right? But I've thought a lot about it because it wasn't hard for him to play music. I mean, he could play anything. He could play anything anytime. But I think, at least what I think he was talking about, was when you have that kind of gift, the responsibility that comes with it, that he knew it was important, that he knew the power of it. And what Spike was talking about, that he had that independence and that commitment and that vision. That's the thing. When people ask this week about his legacy, I mean, as much as the music and the songs that we're going to still be discovering for years and years and years, I think it's that spirit of always looking forward, not worrying about expectation from anybody. If you're an artist, that's what you do. You put yourself out there time after time. And I think that's what he meant by that. It's hard because that's what matters. So that's what I've been thinking about this week.
Carol?
Before this panel, I was thinking a lot about the various different live shows that I had seen of Prince and also Prince collaborators and spin-off groups. And there were two particular times that resonated so strongly that I thought I should talk about them here. One was the arena show that he did to kick off the Purple Rain tour in Detroit, where I was reportedly one of 300 journalists from around the world that were invited to Detroit for the start of this tour. It was a 7-night stand at the Joe Louis Arena there. And the other arena show was the kickoff of the 1999 tour in Philly. And the reason I compare those two is because of the audience for both of those shows. And this is something that Prince himself has spoken about in those few interviews that he deigned to give. Early on, the audience started trying to look like the representation that Prince was presenting for himself, his music, and his vision. And the reason it resonated so strongly with me was because, wow, I said, this is the first time I've seen a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational audience of this size aligning themselves so strongly with an artist that they want to look like his vision, since LaBelle were the first black act to perform at the Metropolitan Opera House in 1975, I believe, and everybody was asked to wear something silver. Okay? And then that connection made me think, okay, well, in a way, the audience that LaBelle put together as a result of the Nightbirds album and those subsequent albums that were heavy with Nona Hendryx's songwriting were the precursor of the vision that Prince brought to life so much more strongly 10 years later. Because if you remember, the message of complete liberation, political, sexual, cultural, of the individual was what the Nightbirds album was all about and what Nona's songwriting was all about. When the band split up at the end of 1976, where was that audience? Where were those people from those international tours supposed to go? Who else was spreading that message? And so when I saw Prince bringing that spirit and that message back to life on this massive scale, bringing it to arena audiences and whatnot, I said, wow, okay, this is where that energy was supposed to go.
So when Prince changed his name to the unpronounceable symbol, we as a culture did not understand what he was doing. We didn't realize it was about emancipation from the label. There was a lot of laughing and joking about it. You can find lots of clips of Jay Leno and David Letterman making fun of him. And if we had understood it was about emancipation and liberation, perhaps we would not have made fun of it so easily, but we didn't expect such a brilliant sort of business move and such an aggressive business move from somebody like him. We should have, but we didn't. But it created this sort of weirdness, like, what do you call him? How do you interact around him? You can't say his name. What do you do? So in the midst of this, I go to Paisley Park, 1998, to interview him for Icon magazine, which no longer exists. I get in the conference room. The interview is horrendous. He talks like Shakespeare, but drunk. And there was like almost nothing usable except like, just look at this weird sentence that he said. So, except for the stuff about Slave and that stuff, he was super clear on the record label stuff. So, I'm like, this is not enough for a cover story. Can I email him some more questions? They say, sure. I emailed him 10 questions, and I wish I had saved that page because he emailed back in like Princey language with the I and the U, and there are 10 questions. He didn't answer all of them. The 10th question was, will you play basketball with me? And to that one, he wrote, anytime, brother. I was, okay. So I flew back to Paisley with my own basketball because there would be no excuses, right? When the photo shoot was going on, I'm there with the basketball. Come on, you said you want to play. Let's play. Let's play. So finally he says, like, get my sneakers. I'm like, holy shit, this is going to happen. Oh, my God, because I just pop and shit up until that moment. So he's in a black scoop neck top, black bell bottoms, and there's this box of sneakers. They're all worn and used, and he pulls out these white with red swoosh Nike Air Force Ones, puts them on, and we're balling on a hoop inside Paisley Park, right around the corner from the rehearsal stage. I know you know right where it is. So we're balling, and he's good. He's like, looks like a baller. Through the legs, behind the back, like he's got a jumper. Now, he doesn't shoot that often, so there's a lot of rebounds, but he looks like a baller, and we're competing on this level. Like, you put out a ball and the boys want to just fight. Like, we're doing that thing, and I want to beat you, and it's not the mask of Prince. It's like this different sort of person. And so it's very exciting, but like after like 15 or 20 minutes, it's still like 3-3 because, neither of us are really making jumpers. So we add in my photographer and his bassist. They're on a team, and we're on a team. So now I'm at the top of the key or whatever, and he gets open. He makes a little move, he gets open, and I pass it to him. But he doesn't see that the ball is coming, right? So I'm like, oh, shit, it's going to hit him. So I got to say something, right? This is like milliseconds. So I'm like, Prince! But then I'm like, you can't say that. You're going to get thrown out of here. So it's more like, Prince! So the ball misses him and goes out of bounds. He goes and fetches it himself, and he comes back, and he's holding it, and he's laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? And he goes, you didn't know what to call me. And he loved that. He loved that we were all off balance about it. If you could have called him Prince, you could have called him Purple Rain, like whatever. He'd be fine with it, but he loved that stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So panel, feel free to jump in anywhere. This is not like one at a time, just any, full conversation. So I wanted to actually kind of riff off of what Carol was talking about in terms of these influences. I hadn't really thought enough, I guess, about LaBelle as a precursor to Prince, and I think that's absolutely interesting and valid. What about some other obvious influences to Prince's sound, his image, his look? Can we kind of riff on some of those? Going back to the 60s and 70s, thinking about Prince as a product of that time.
Well, he gets so attached to Jimi Hendrix because of the purple, because of the guitar,
which he rejected right himself. He said that wasn't my primary influence. But
look,
it's obvious.
Look, you got to discount everything he says to media, right? I take the things seriously that he says to other people in his circle more seriously than right, because he's constantly trying to confuse you with media. But he reminded me more of James Brown from the beginning than Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, actually, well, he himself said that his style was more closer to Santana than Hendrix, which if you tonal wise, yeah, you could definitely see the similarities. I think for me, because I was 11 years old when 1999 came out, and if you remember the top of the 80s, when Christianity and conservative ideas and Reaganomics were all like coming into fruition, and my parents were a part of that. Like, you heard a wave of like former 70s people now becoming like born again Christians, like B.J. Thomas and Donna Summer, and like all these people were like
Bob Dylan.
Yeah, even Dylan. Yeah, I got into Dylan during the Christian period because he was like on Christian radio all the time. Like my parents became one of those people. Like they were like real hip in the 60s and 70s, and then they were like, okay, we got to atone for all the sins that we've done. We'll become Christians. So Prince was banned in my household. Now, I've documented many times of the lengthy punishments I've had in the name of listening to his music. But the weird thing about it all is, of course, my mom and my dad are thinking that they're trying to shield me from the sexual lewdness of it all. But the way that I absorb music, as a musician, I always listen to the music first and kind of the lyrics last. Maybe like Tariq and my group will focus on lyrics first and then music secondary. But when you either you watch movies a bunch or you listen to music a whole bunch of times, you tend to not focus on what's in front, but I listen to what's in the background, and that's when I knew that he really wasn't your average normal person, just as far as his chord structure was concerned, or even the idea of a remix. Prince was really a pioneer, really in remixing. Like he literally invented the remix. As far as by that point, DJs or record companies would do like edits and just to lengthen a song, and Prince would totally transform the song to something else. So you get the Little Red Corvette 12-inch. Suddenly, a song that's a major key in a rock song that's in a major key that will attract the white audience. Suddenly, you go to the relative minor of it and a different bass line, and becomes like the blackest thing he's ever done. And that just totally, like, just the whole period of him recontextualizing like all of his singles on the 12 inches and doing new ideas there. Like, he invented the remix. Sorry, did he?
Or Tom Moulton, or
Yeah, but I mean, really invented the remix. When no disrespect to Tom Moulton, none of the guys in the 70s, but those were edits. Those were just reasons to lengthen the song so that they could get played longer in discos. But Prince would literally, same with Raspberry Beret. Like, he totally changes the bass line, the 12-inch version of that song to a minor song, and totally changes the mood of the song. Now that it's minor, it's as if he wanted to cover both bases. So a lot of his rock songs that were singles, he would recontextualize them to attract his black audience.
So I guess the question is, where does some of that that creativity come from, right? Because there's Hendrix we could talk about. There's James
Comes
Brown.
from God.
God, of
And
course.
it's in
Well
discussion.
said, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, his references like Stevie, and I'm
musician
just trying to
father.
put some context around. He didn't just
Yeah.
come out of nowhere, right? That's usually the thinking.
Right,
He's a
of
genius.
course.
He came out of nowhere, just popped up out of the womb.
Yeah, but
No.
I'd like to say this though. There's this, we touched upon it in this off the wall thing we did. There's perception with black artists and athletes that we come out the womb dunking, singing, and dancing, which is a total discount that counts the hard work, the craftsmanship, the many hours, the blood, sweat, and tears. I don't care how great you are. Michael Jordan couldn't shoot coming out. I mean, every summer he would work on the weakest part of his game to become. We work. We don't come out. I mean, you're a talent. But I mean, so often black artists again and again, we come out singing, dancing, dunking, out the womb, and it's a total disrespect to the artistry.
No, I mean, Amir wrote a really nice piece in Rolling Stone on the site this week about following that work ethic from Prince, and I think that nobody ever saw anybody work harder or put in more hours or drill a band harder or any of that stuff than him. And I think
We got that from James Brown, though.
well, sure. But I think the influences, I mean, there's all the musical influences. There's the James Brown, there's the Hendrix, the Santana. There were all the new wave. He was listening crazy for Gary Newman and Thompson Twins and all these new wave records. But there are these other influences. One thing that was real interesting when I was working on the Purple Rain book was hearing friends, I guess it was Jill Jones, who was talking about he was obsessed with the old Hollywood studio system. That he would read books about all the old Hollywood studio heads and directors, and he would watch movies from the 30s and 40s, and that was something he was fascinated with. And if you think about him casting The Time and Vanity Six and all, and having this kind of repertory group that he worked with, and then matching songs to them and matching a vision and a style for each of them, obviously then turning into masterminding Purple Rain and everything that came with that. But he was drawing not just from musical influences, but from whatever he could absorb that were these creative visionaries that could help him harness all of this stuff that he was trying to get out there.
Yes, I mean Spike's point is incredibly important. Black artists and athletes are consistently seen to be natural. Prince is of the example of incredibly hard work. This is the hardest working man in show business. A 24-hour session in the recording studio was short for him. They would do 36 hours in the studio, 48 hours in the studio. No cocaine, right? Very little caffeine, just filled with the spirit of people are listening to this music. Des Dickerson talking about we would rehearse for 6 to 8 hours, and then we would leave. He's not taking breaks at all during this period. We would leave, and he'd go to the Lindrum machine for 4 to 5 hours. I mean, he's constantly either recording, rehearsing, writing something. He's making, during his peak, a song a day, right? I mean, can you explain to the people how insane it is to make a song a day for several
A good
years?
song.
A completed song, and an actually effective song, that is extremely hard. I mean, most people will agree that he really got into his own between 82 and 88. I'm one of the lucky few people that represents the outside, the fandom, but has access to the inside and talking to a lot of his bandmates and whatnot. And also, I've been lucky to hear a lot of these rehearsals, and that's probably, to me, that's the greatest revelation of them all. How they would consistently play the same 4-bar loop over and over and over and over. And I asked them once I met them, like, what was that like? Like, what were you guys doing, like playing James Brown's Body Heat for 3 hours in a row? You didn't even get to the bridge yet. And a lot of them would just roll their eyes up, like, that's him. He just wants perfection. But that to me is probably the most impressive. I mean, some things were a little comical. I think once he screamed on Lisa for reading a comic book or something. Like, she only had to hold one note, but literally, like, she's holding one note while they're like jamming, and he stops the song. It's like, you're reading your comic book, like, pay attention. But just, to hear what kind of band leader he was, that to me, that's peerless, and almost to the point where, asking Alan Leeds, like, who's the harder task,
His manager, Alan Leeds, former manager.
Yeah, former manager Alan Leeds, who was harder, Prince or James Brown? I think he would inch Prince 51 to 49.
And he managed both, right?
Yes.
To go back to your point about remixing and Prince's involvement in rearranging and reorchestrating and recontextualizing his work, I think that's a jazz impulse, and I think that his father being a musician was a big influence on him, and the fact that he's said in his earliest interviews that growing up in Minneapolis, the local radio was mostly adult-oriented rock and some jazz stations and maybe some Christian stations and whatnot. So at his very, very youngest listening to radio, he had a lot of classic rock influences. He had his parents, who, were jazz and lounge performers and whatnot, his mother. And he also had his relatives' record collections. And these were all things that he actually said during the first couple of years where he was actually still doing interviews. So this is stuff that he was willing to admit to. But you can hear it in his work. And, when you see him performing, particularly in the arena shows, he didn't just quote other musicians and other musicians' work. he also quoted them visually. I remember watching him perform and seeing him absolutely mimic an act that a move that Mick Jagger had done in a performance that was recorded on Let's Spend the Night Together, which was a performance film that was released in the 80s. And I said, because it was so clear that he was constantly sending messages.
Was he making fun of it?
In a
Was
way,
he mocking it?
in a way, yes. But the funny
He
thing.
could dance better than Mick Jagger.
Oh, of course. But his point was he was performing a song where he was rearranging it as they played, okay? And he was adding a harder rock edge to the solo he was doing that appeared on the record. And during that, he gave the audience a little Mick Jagger, little Mouet thing, just to say, yo, you think he's rock and roll? This is rock and roll. Yeah. You know, and he would do that a lot, you know, in live performance.
Kimbra,
I was just going to say that to me, Prince was a student and constantly curious. So although he had these tendencies to be a very strong band leader and be very clear about what he wants, if you look at who he cites as influences, and for me, he was an entry point into Sly and the Family Stone, Parliament Funkadelic, all of this stuff where of course, and you go, this is where he got his groove from, and this sense of, instinct for rhythm. But beyond that, he was fascinated with the craft of songwriting. Joni Mitchell, I mean, even the fact, I worked with Lenny Waronker and Warner Brothers, and he would tell me that
Lenny, who signed Prince back in the day.
That's right, yeah. So he said it was fascinating that Prince liked Carolina, which is a song on my album that sounds a bit like Fleetwood Mac or something. It's like 3-part harmonies all the way, and not really, not the most sort of funk-influenced of the other songs that are on there. He said he's fascinated with the things that he doesn't do, or the things that are less like what he does. If he hears something he can do, he was fascinated and curious about the things that he knew less about. And I just think that as an artist, that is so inspiring to me, to always be a student and on the lookout for things that are intriguing and different.
Yeah, Des Dickerson talked about that his greatest ability was to be a student. And anything that you had that you could do, he would start to be a student of you, and then soon he would be a master of that, and he'd be beyond you.
Same with the basketball stuff that you're talking about as well, that ability to, be fascinated by a sport and want to execute it with precision, and become obsessed with it maybe as well to a point, which is an amazing work ethic to have.
Let's talk a little bit about Minneapolis itself as a city, or the place that gave birth to Prince. I think it's sort of not maybe widely understood exactly what, how he came out of that place and created the music that he did. Does anybody want to talk about that for a bit?
I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, Alan Leeds who lives there, moved there because of Prince, with his wife, who happens to be Black Gwen. He talks about Minneapolis as the miscegenation capital of America, that there's more mixed race people and couples there, he says, than anywhere else. And so I think there you start to see the beginning of the attitude that we see in Uptown and some of the other songs, that he's intersectional, he's open to everybody. He's saying, I don't want your labels, don't call me black or white, don't box me into being one sort of thing. And the sort of community was open to those sort of things, open to him having multiple sort of influences at once.
Yeah, there's an interview that he gave Mojo, this electrifying Mojo from Detroit, who was one of the key major black DJs that really, gave Prince the thumbs up when he needed it from his first album. And I guess Mojo had asked Prince, this was in '86, right before the Parade album came out. Prince did like an impromptu phoner with him. And, Prince said that because the town was dead, that he knew he had to make something on his own. Which I believe that had he grown up in New York or LA, it wouldn't have been as special. I think that Minneapolis offered the perfect setting of isolation, less distractions. I mean, even where Paisley Park is located, like the Dairy Queen down the street is like a highlight lunch. If, it's not much to distract you out there, which allows for more creativity. I think he's wise enough to know that some of his records were made at the record plant in L.A. And then, majority of the stuff that he created in Minnesota. I mean, isolation, well, specifically in this case, I mean, unfortunately, isolation is not a good thing, but creatively, at least, a lot of his best results in, that discipline came from being in a place where there was no distraction.
What a lot of musicians say about Minnesota, Minneapolis is, it's so cold and snowy 7 months out of the year that there's no reason to go outside. You just stay in, you stay in and work, because what else are you going to do? You can't even drive through the streets. And there's reasons, a lot of music that's come out of there. There's a lot of bands that have come out of there, especially at that time there was all this stuff going on. I think, what Carol said is interesting, because he did talk about, there wasn't a full 24-hour-a-day R&B station in Minneapolis when he was growing up. There was one split signal station that had hour blocks of programming, but I think he was exposed to, these different sources, these different sounds, these different ideas. And then what's interesting is that's what he didn't run from that. It was something he always needed to return to, that he needed the ability to, I think, to move around that city in a different way than he could have moved himself around in New York and LA, that there was this base of operations where, that meant going back to work for him.
When you talk about the influences too, it matters when we're talking about, of course, right? On 1999, Des Dickerson is the lead guitarist, and he's taking some of Dez's influence, and Dez is saying, let's be a hard rock band. Let's be a really hard rock band. So guiding him away from the edgy funk, Dez leaves, or is kicked out. Wendy Melvoin takes his place, and she brings in Susanna Melvoin, her twin sister, and she becomes his girlfriend, and she starts playing him the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, things he had not grown up listening to because Minneapolis radio was not big on that. So then Around the World in a Day sounds like a late 60s Beatles record, right? Because of those. So he's sort of spongy that way as you're going along.
He's a synthesizer, right? He takes, in many ways, right? But he takes from all these different sources and he fuses them in this really syncretic and incredible way. So let's actually use that as a sort of segue to talk about songwriting, because he's a master songwriter, master producer, but I want to just talk a little bit about the songwriting itself, his creative approach to songwriting and arranging. Is there a particular Prince song or an aspect of Prince's songs, one of his songs, like a bridge or whatever, that really demonstrates his incredible craft? There's so many.
Breath, how long do you want to talk about this?
Just one thing that matters to you that represents that.
You know what's impressive to me? So when Harry and I started,
Harry Weinger,
Yeah.
co-teacher of
Hi there.
Questlove's class on Prince and Michael Jackson, just sitting here today.
So when we were doing the Prince course, and I listened to Prince all the time, so it's not like I have to absorb it more intensely for other reasons. But when I was listening to Dirty Mind, and this is right when Toure's book came out, I started listening to Sister over and over again.
From
Dirty Mind.
1981.
Now, the thing that you have to understand is, when Dirty Mind came out, it was way, way before its time. It really pushed a lot of buttons. It was more of a critical favorite. By that point, Prince was kind of in the black category as far as he had one hit single by '79 and '80. He sort of turned his back on becoming the new black idol. Was he going to be Smokey? Was he going to be the next Stevie Wonder? Was he going to be the next Michael Jackson? He turned his back on it and made a totally radical album akin to New Wave that really got a lot of critical acclaim. Rolling Stone famously gave it a lead 4.5-star review, which was about as strange as Beyonce getting a perfect 5-star review in this latest issue, which that's a first for a black woman, and it was rare for Prince, an unproven talent, to get this much acclaim. But whenever Sister has been brought up, at least in like circles. It's not like our go-to song. And I've been kind of dismissive as like, oh, okay, like a novelty song. Like, okay, he sings this quick song about incest with his sister, but it wasn't. I know it's something that you shouldn't take as lightly, but I never like absorbed it like a Prince song that I really liked. But for some reason, when I was looking at the Dirty Mind Wax, I saw that Sister was only 1 minute and 23 seconds.
Really short.
And I kept listening to it, and I was amazed that, one, he was able to really articulate pop mastery in this short of time. But not only that, but to convey all these emotions in 90 seconds. I mean, he goes from confusion to naivete to realization that, wait a minute, she's committing statutory rape on me, to anger, and then back to confusion. Like all these range of emotions in 90 seconds. Like any other artist, I mean, it takes Miles Davis 22 minutes to really get like Bitches Brew or Pharaoh's Dance out for you to get the vision. And here in 90 seconds, he's able to convey these things. He led us into Paisley Park when I was producing Common's Electric Circus album. I mean, he came and listened to the song, and then he's like, leave the tapes with me, and then I'll add to it. So the Star 69 song, he's playing guitar on it. But our only interaction was always on the stage, never in a studio environment. Although I watched him create a song before.
Well, can you please just talk about that?
Oh, that old thing?
I'm going to end my sentence there. No.
When the D'Angelo Voodoo Tour came to Minnesota, he sent for me and D'Angelo, and it was 3 a.m. Well, we got the call at like 1 a.m. A lot of my Prince calls happen after midnight, so it was 1 a.m. and we were told a driver will be downstairs. Like, we didn't even confirm if we were going to do it or not. It's like, Prince wants to see you guys. A driver will be downstairs at 1:30 in the morning. Yo, man, you going? I don't know. You going? You going? You going? You going? So we went, and when we walked in Paisley Park, the first thing we noticed that, you know, all the walls are white, and he has a lot of murals of himself on the wall. So instantly I was thinking of those old Three Stooges episodes where, you know, the eyes of the artwork are watching you walk back and forth. Erykah Badu once told me she did a striptease in front of one of them because she was convinced that there was hidden cameras in the eyes. She might have been lying to me. She was like, nope, I got naked. So, yeah, I went in at the very last minute when he was laying a piano part down, and I was impressed that he was still using a Juno, which I think at the time,
Synthesizer.
Jack knows everything. Like, what year did the Juno come out? I was only playing. I didn't know that you really knew when it came out. Yeah, so I was impressed that he had a pristine Juno. But when I came there, I asked him and his engineer, Femi Jaya, if it was either look in the vaults or look through his old instruments. And I chose the instruments. So went downstairs in the basement, and that moment, like that Pulp Fiction briefcase moment, like 3 Linn drums were there, all these old synthesizers, old ARPs and everything were like just sitting there. So even now, like all the stuff that Frank plays on The Tonight Show, those electronic pads are sounds that Prince let us have from Paisley Park.
So when did the songwriting occur? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, Dilla like created the song and then gave Prince the song and then gave me and James Poyser the song. So it kind of just, you know, we traded ideas, and then that's how Star 69 came up.
Before we totally lose Sister, I just want to give Amir credit and I don't know if this exists on the web. I'm sure it does. A couple years ago at the Carnegie Hall Prince tribute benefit show, you guys did an incredible interpretation with Bilal of Sister.
I forgot about that.
That was a
don't have it.
profound
You have it, though.
psychological take on that song. I mean, it was really like an
'cause I figured
intense thing.
If we were covering Prince's song, I really wanted people to get the idea of what that song really was, and it was purging anger. Like a lot of people tend to think that, and I don't know if it's just the black man's sexuality in America, but you tend to think that, oh, Prince always sings about his sex, so naturally you just think like he's the aggressor. And it really wasn't until I read your book that Prince was never the aggressor in none of his songs.
Well, I mean, International Lover is like the one where he's the dominant figure, but
that's only because he was writing for Mars Day.
Right.
Like that was supposed to be.
That's
a time
like
But yes, he's-
that's like the comedy cartoon version.
yes, he is consistently the one who is overpowered by the more sexual Nikki or the girl with the raspberry beret or the girl with the little red cord. Like they are always more powerful than him, and he has to wonder if I have enough class, if I can live up to this moment of the sexuality of this woman.
Yeah. So once I realized that Sister was more about statutory rape than, hey man, I did it to my sister. Like that was the idea that you always like. Oh, this guy sings about fellatio, and then he fucks his sister in the next song. That sort of thing that preachers were talking about when they were like discussing Prince in like the church. So once I realized that, I wanted to make a dramatic rendition where it sounds angrier and you really get the gist of what the song means.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Why Prince's kind of deployment of sex and eroticism and all of this stuff mattered so much, especially in the 1980s, right? Because, I mean, it's a particular moment that we're talking about when all of this stuff is happening. And he didn't continue in his career doing that stuff, right, into the 2000s and beyond for many reasons.
I think it's being rebellious. I think at that moment when he was coming out, he didn't want to fit in any box. He didn't want to have anything to do with any musical rules. So sex was the thing that nobody really wanted to speak about, not that blatant. And not
he had
that,
Rick James, and there was,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very sexually
not as
liberated
sexy.
period,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that moment, you see S&M starting to become more normalized, right? Dr. Ruth was a big famous person. I mean, just as a nation, we were getting more raw about our expression of sexuality than we had been in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I think there's something about the way Prince talked about sex that had this tension to it, and you mentioned how complex it was. It was never just, like caveman style. It was always this real. There was
Unga
a
bunga.
tenderness to it. There
like
was
a walk down.
There was really a fragility and a vulnerability to it. And as a woman listening to his music, I always felt somehow empowered by all of his songs about sex, because there was something where he put it on such a sacred kind of pedestal when he talked about these things. And there was always so much nuanced, angles to things he was talking
Well,
about. And it's important to talk about that, because he wasn't just one track with that.
It's come up a lot this week, but if you think about especially the kind of sex symbol soul men before him, they really are defined by this divide between sex and spirituality, between sin and salvation. If you look at Al Green's career and Marvin Gaye's career and this Sam Cooke's career, I mean, people who lived this out, for him, it was all together. I mean, and you wrote about this in the book, and sex was spirituality to him. It was about encompassing all of this stuff as opposed to breaking up and dividing it. There are these weird moments where it seems to catch back up with him. I was listening to, I forgot about it, that Temptation song at the end of Around the World in a Day, when he actually gets into the argument with God in the way that he did sometimes on the Purple Rain tour about you have to love her the right way. Something at that moment that was obviously some guilt that came bubbling back up in him. But other than those moments, this was when he taught, in Adore, that is that's as much a prayer as a sex song. And you can't pull those strains apart at a certain
Angels
point.
are watching them having sex and crying because it's so beautiful. I mean, what an amazing image.
But I think that as a theme for songwriting, he used sex as a road to liberation, because all of his music was essentially about liberation of the individual and freedom. And whether he was framing it in a political context, whether he was framing it in a relationship context, whether he was framing it in a socioeconomic context, it was always about freedom, and sexuality was kind of a doorway to that, because he thought that was universal enough so that he could pour every other idea in it and through it. I think that in a song like Joy and Repetition, which is my personal favorite Prince song, I mean, there's so many things going on there too. I mean, first of all, the hook of the song is never even spoken of or voiced until almost the very end of the song. The hook of the song are the two words that the girl that he sees on stage is repeating, which is "love me." And to me, creating a song with that elaborate structure that is basically his reply to people who want him to like rap per se, and he's saying, well, you know, I can rap too, but this is my form of rap. It's going to be spoken word poetry, and it's going to do everything that I think that rap is trying to do, but it's going to do it my way.
I have a question. Maybe Alan or Toure or even Spike can weigh in. Because of the entry of the 80s and the one common denominator, and some of my students here, when we later talk about sexual imagery during the early 80s, I tend to notice that a lot of ambiguity was kind of the safest road to travel, at least for the 80s. Like neither Michael, Lionel, or Prince was the Teddy Pendergrass mode of "Come here, woman," you know, that whatever the caveman idea that you had, you know. But how do you think that Prince was able to sort of flaunt and damn near invent or establish really sexuality without it being a threat to America? Because I feel as though Michael Jackson had to.
But it was
typical.
so threatening, right? I mean, he was the most dangerous guy in America. Don't take your girlfriend to the Prince show, because you'll be going home alone.
And
Like,
Nikki was the reason that the parent Tipper Gore started the PMRC and started all of that.
The
And there was
snickering.
that People magazine cover of "Has Music Gone Too Far?" with a picture of Prince. I mean, I think that there was a lot of threat that was there.
Here's,
But
a,
I think
here's a book from '84. I just
think
got
the
it from
feminine-
my library.
Yeah.
Right, on Prince, this I used to have back in the day. And then the back says, "The complete inside story of the most controversial entertainer of our times."
I think that feminine ability he had as a man.
What?
The feminine side of him as a man allowed some people to accept it a little different. I believe.
So does
I want to hear.
It was threatening, but
I want to hear
non-threatening.
Spike talk about the '80s a little bit, because you too are one of the black people who were able to cross over in the '80s and have huge success for your art. And Prince was there. Eddie Murphy did that.
And use
Michael,
sex as a
obviously.
theme.
And this is the first. This is the first time.
I'm not in his league.
But the '80s is the first time that a lot of black people are able to cross over and maintain their credibility with the community. So talk about the vibe and talk about how artists are able to, in the '80s, were able to do that.
Well, you're just doing your thing. Prince saw She's Gonna Have It, and he called me up out of the blue, said I wanted to meet you. He flew me out to Paisley Park. I forgot they were shooting something there, and so
That was the second coming, right? If what are you talking about? When you
it's post.
She's Gotta Have It.
my
That would have been
86. So
that-
what album? What
Oh,
would have been
86.
shooting?
Oh, okay. Oh, then that
Yeah.
would have
Rain
been
around the world.
under Cherry Moon.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
probably.
a lot of stuff that's been shot.
On the Cherry
if
Moon.
they
was
were
probably-
shooting there, it could have been Graffiti Bridge too, depending when he sang. Because Cherry Moon, they didn't
there was
really shoot
there was
there
a film
so much.
There was a film built around the Madhouse album that it snuck on the internet for a second, but
Nah, I think it was on the Cherry Moon, and so people. I mean, Eddie. People just doing that thing. I mean, it was. I don't think it was a movement. People thinking the same, but I didn't know Prince. I mean, he didn't know me, and Carol, you probably answer the question better than me,
But you know,
you had to build his voice, right?
But I'm sorry. You started talking about meeting him, and then
Yeah.
can you talk about when you met him that time?
I was just amazed that he even saw the film. So I went there. He was directing, And he would take time out to talk in the middle of a shoot. I'd say, "Why are you doing that? I mean, you gotta work." But he was always just a very generous guy. I know I gave the example of Malcolm X. I just posted something on my Instagram the other day where he gave me a guitar. And I said, "Can you autograph for me?" He said, "No." You had a guitar. I said, "Thank you very much." And and then I know everybody knows this up here on the panel. For the people who were in the room, he was funny as shit. He was.
very funny.
I mean, everybody probably could talk about it, but he would have me dying laughing. I mean, he was funny, and it's also, if you really listen to the music, there's a lot of funny shit in the lyrics too.
Yeah.
I mean, the lyrics are.
But it's
Not the ri- but not the ride. You crash up everything, but not the ride.
But it's interesting because the way that he's sort of remembered, even in a comical way, if you think of Saturday Night Live and Fred Armisen's sort of take on Prince, right, is that he's almost like a Nosferatu or a Dracula. He's like so serious, arch serious. So he had these different sides to him, right?
Maybe in a way that's why he wasn't seen. I mean, it's interesting you talk about Prince as a threat at a time, and obviously, but I think maybe what was more threatening to people was he was such a paradox and mystifying in terms of his identity. I mean, maybe it was more spiritual, like you said, in a mystical sense that, you know, in the spirit there is no male or female. He kind of didn't, he was just this fluid, evolving being, and that more than anything was probably the threat than a black man trying to be, you know, this or that, or that he might be gay, or that no one really knew. It was just that he was a fluid, I don't know, it was a paradox.
But as was said, you know, androgyny was a trend in the 80s, right? James Baldwin was writing on it in 85.
Well,
Boy
even in
George.
pop music, Boy George, Cindy, Annie Lennox.
Bowie.
But was it a
Bowie,
trend or more
the
of
new
a
wave
survival
stuff.
Yeah,
tactic? Was it more of a trend or a survival tactic? I think a lot of black people, whether they know it or not, feel as though they have to tread lightly or walk on kind of a landmine field.
But a lot of white men were doing that same sort of tortured representation of masculinity, right, at the same time, right? Well, you're talking about Boy
Bowie.
George. She's all the guys in New Wave.
What's the guy, George?
I mean, there was a lot of eyeliner
George Michael?
on men
George
in the
everybody,
80s.
I mean, it was a
Well, and
popular
it was
mode.
and it was a
Boy.
different visual moment, you know, talking about early MTV days, where, especially in the beginning when MTV didn't have enough videos to fill their hours, any weird thing that showed up could kind of get on the air, and so there was this space where,
As long as it wasn't R&B.
right,
Yeah, right. It
Well,
didn't
I'm
have
saying
enough,
that-
right,
no,
to
I
have
want to
the
get to
videos,
that.
but good, right.
I want to
Rick
get to
James,
that.
Rick James outsold all of them, and you know he could. Super Freak was a bona fide hit, and couldn't get on MTV because Rick James was too black, and that's the whole point I'm trying to
I
get
mean,
to.
at that point, we all were too black for MTV.
It wasn't until Michael Jackson and Columbia Records basically blackmailed
Walter
MTV
Yetnikoff.
and said, you are not going to get any of our videos unless you start playing Michael Jackson in all of our R&B videos that we make, that it changed.
What's the guy's name? Robert? What's his name?
Robert Pittman.
Pittman.
Yeah, he's a lot of revision history going on now. He said that didn't happen. That's bullshit.
So, but
That
this,
definitely happened.
but this crossover moment, right? Let's talk about Prince and Michael Jackson for a minute, because we've got our Michael Jackson class here as well. But they practice crossover in different ways. Would you panel agree that that's maybe the case? I mean, one of our professors here, Dan Charnas, has just written something about the way in which Michael Jackson constructed Thriller with Quincy Jones and his team to have, you know, each song reach a different demographic, whereas Prince was kind of, I would argue, maybe a little bit more syncretic, meaning in the context of a single song like When Doves Cry, right? It's
Right.
crossover itself. He didn't need a song for every demo, although he also did a little bit of that.
I'll say that, you know, it goes without saying that without the doors that Michael Jackson and the gangster move that Walter Yetnikoff pulled, it would have been harder for Prince to get to that place. But I think it should also be noted that Prince did not want to start in the mailroom.
Right.
Michael Jackson
Right.
went from the Chitlin Circuit to the mailroom to, you know, the attention of Motown to Teendom to the biggest black artists, and then, you know, he paced his way to that mountaintop, whereas Prince purposely did not want to do Soul Train. did not want to, he wanted to be treated as a rock artist.
I mean,
He
talking
wanted to
about
blow apart all those illusions.
Go ahead. I mean, when you talk about self-determination, Malcolm X, when he says, I'm going to make my own movie, that is self-determination. And there was no way in hell that an artist of that size, he was doing about $1 million to $2 million, right? $2 million was a stretch for him at that point. Spike, how could you merit a $10 to $15 million movie budget when you only pull in an audience of about $1 million and $1.5 million, right? Like, no studio would go for that.
I mean, you wrote the book, so about it. I just read, which is a great book.
Thank you, Spike. No, but I mean,
You
yeah,
wrote a book
it's what
about the making of.
We told you
it's
Prince
just like
you're
he
fired.
went to, Prince went to his managers and said, "You're going to get me a feature film deal, and if you don't do it, you're fired, and somebody else will do it." But you have to remember, this was somebody who, when he was, 17, turned down the first record deals he was offered because he insisted on full creative control. I mean, that was always what Carol said. That was always behind everything that he was doing. And he had that vision when nobody around, everybody around him thought he was nuts when he was talking about making Purple Rain. The band, he was. Like, you don't just decide, they're not handing out feature films to anybody with a song on the radio.
But I don't know what the word is, nuts, because
No, he had
But here's the
could
thing,
see
though.
it.
visionaries are called nuts.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When Philip Knight, who's making the soles of the Nikes out of a motherfucking waffle iron and sell them out of his trunk, when Ted Turner says we're gonna have a network, we show news 24 hours, we go
That's
again,
crazy.
and
24 hours a day? Get out of here.
who's gonna watch that?
Who would watch that?
And that's the type of visionary that Prince belongs to that group. I mean, that example of who's gonna you're gonna do a movie.
Well, you know what? The other question, though, he got $7 billion. How do you make a movie like that for $7 billion?
You make your band,
It
the
was-
cast, and you shoot in the winter in Minneapolis, and it sounds like it's the stupidest idea. I mean,
Right.
does that sound like a blockbuster,
No.
or does that sound like a disaster?
Right.
But he could see, he knew what he needed to do
Visualize.
to translate his sound and his style, his image. It was, putting those pieces together, the way that he moved the band pieces around, the way that he moved the songwriting pieces around, knowing that there was this visual way that he could go translate that to the universe. That's what vision is. And, the comparison to Michael is really interesting because with Prince, there's this constant tension of whether this guy is a stadium-filling global superstar or was he the world's biggest cult artist who had 1 million people who would follow him anywhere. And Purple Rain, he got to do both. The rest of the time, he really is going, and you can see, Michael makes Thriller. He says, my next record, I'm going to sell 100 million copies, and tries and makes Bad. Has that written on a Post-it note on his mirror, 100 million copies. Prince gets a few months into Purple Rain and realizes, if I'm really going to work this, I've got to go tour the States, then go to Europe, do a stadium lap, go to Australia. I've got to do this for the next 2.5 years. I'm not doing that. He cut off the Purple Rain tour after 6 months. He never went to Europe. And 2 weeks after the tour ended, he had Around the World in a Day in stores, sounding nothing like Purple Rain, without a single, and saying, I got to leave the playing field open. I'm not going to make Purple Rain 2. I'm not going to, take every ounce that I can out of this thing. He was setting himself up for a very different career than the way Michael thought about his career.
But he also had the example of the Beatles. What do you think the movie Help did for the Beatles? What do you think the movie Hard Day's Night did for the Beatles? I mean, Prince was a student of pop culture. He really, really was. And he made a lot of his decisions based on examples he had seen in the past that had worked for others, and he thought that he had a new spin on it and he could make it work for him.
Bowie, too.
Similar to the Beatles, by the time 1966 came, they were tired of being mopheads. They were tired of being teen idols. Right. So they thought, let's make a departure record and turn our backs on that. And then, unfortunately, it backfired and became the biggest selling, the most critically acclaimed album of all time, which is Sgt. Pepper's, which is what I imagine that he was trying to do, which is become a serious artiste. Yeah. And I'm actually knowing what those songs were that he could have made Purple Rain 2 with. I'm glad he made the decision that he made. And
But he did make Under the Cherry Moon, which was critical flop. Graffiti Bridge, critical flop. What happened with the movie career? Because on one hand, he did what Michael Jackson couldn't do, and the other, the movies went nowhere, right?
I have a theory about Cherry Moon.
I watched Graffiti.
I love Cherry Moon.
I love Prince.
Yeah.
I watched Graffiti Bridge 2 days ago.
Oh no.
Jesus.
So bad.
But yesterday in our class, which thank you showed up, we showed Sign of Times. That movie's a motherfucker.
Yeah.
I love that. And my
He's 2
guy
for
in
2.
the, what?
He's 2 for 2. Sign of the Times, Purple Rain's good film.
Under Cherry Moon.
I personally like Under the Cherry Moon, but I
Yeah,
know
me
the world
too.
doesn't like it.
That's
The
the,
soundtracks
But I have a
are
reason.
unbelievable.
Oh no.
that's
The
the one where he
soundtracks are
was
all
in the,
good.
in
Sign of the
boat.
Time. If you want to go
In the water.
past,
Yeah.
it's hard to get.
It's hard to get.
Sign of the Times.
It'll probably show up
He
on
directed
YouTube
it.
now.
It's
Live
a
concert
concert,
film.
live concert.
Carol, do you want,
Amazing. Amazing.
Carol wants to jump in 1 sec.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something about Under the Cherry Moon. I mean, structurally, it was difficult to watch because it was not linear the way we're used to films being linear. However, if you realize that the album he released as the soundtrack to Cherry Moon was called Parade, which was the name of a piece that Eric Satie wrote in collaboration with some of the top avant-garde artists in Paris at the time. Cocteau was involved. I mean, basically, he was aware that if he set the movie in Europe and basically had all these surreal things happening, but with a Black American sensibility as the filter for it all, that he would be making the first Black surrealist film of that time period. And I think that he really was basically just, trying to do a riff on Satie. That's one of the reasons why I love that film, because when I went back and looked at it through that lens, through that critical lens, I said, "Holy shit!"
let me pull back to the seminal film Purple Rain, and putting the amazing concert scenes aside, and that's the bulk of the movie, the joy of the movie. That aside, just on the acting, maybe this is sacrilegious, but Morris Day basically almost steals the film from Prince.
Prince says that, right? Prince has done interviews where he says, Morris Day is, he deserved it. I mean, he's like,
It was
he's
Morris and Jerome together, though, really.
Yes.
But it's not just that Morris is pimping at the beginning of the film. He has this great emotional reconciliation at the end where he's rooting for Prince, where he feels bad, mocking him, and then he's rooting for him at the very end. And that redemption
I
is really
think that,
powerful.
For me, that scene, that redemption scene, comes after the group goes past his thing, and he says, "How's your father?
As a family.
How's your family?" Then they show a shot of him alone. For me, that paid off bigger than him in the concert.
Yes.
Going like that.
Yeah.
To the music.
Yeah.
I heard that he wanted that added in 11th hour.
Yeah,
Who
that
had
shot.
what?
I think that's right.
Not Magnoli. Who directed
Al
it?
Magnoli.
Yeah, Albert on the director's cut said that that scene where they're mocking Prince and then he has regrets in the hallway, that Morris kind of asked them to put that in there. It's not make him look like a total ass.
What do we make of his relationship with women at the time, right? Because he always seemed to be surrounded by so many women who looked a particular way, right? Also very talented.
Were you a spin? Were you ever a spin?
I was not as
I was
far back as
asked
then.
to be the guest editor.
Oh, I love that issue. I had that
I was
issue.
still have
asked,
it.
Favorite
I was
issue of all time.
asked to be guest editor of Spin Magazine. So one of the people I wanted to interview was Prince, and he agreed to do it. And one of the questions I asked, I said, I forgot exactly what I said, was like, "Do you like black women?" Go something like that. I don't know. I forgot what he said, but
How can you forget that?
because that was the thing. Where are the sisters?
But he was surrounded by, and he also was a great supporter of talent.
even
Mavis
with-
Staples and Shaka Khan.
That
and-
was later.
No, but
Even-
also Sheila
But
E.
even
and-
with Maite, right? Why did she
It's like-
become Egyptian? Why can't she be who she is?
But I'm also talking about the fact that, right, like he also had
What-
Vanity Six
As
and
muses.
Apollonia.
I'm
right.
talking about when I was guest editor. I'm talking about what's happening. I don't know what happened in the future. When I answer that question, if you look at the videos and the movies, I mean, it might have been octoroon, quadroons up
So
in
there's
there,
a predilection for lighter skinned woman who could have been right. That's definitely part of his career, and the thing of
Ambiguity.
colorism in his career, right? That he actually
about
tried to
ambiguity.
portray himself as
What'd
sort
you
of.
say?
It was all about ambiguity. In other words, one of the things that I always believed that Prince was trying to get across in terms of his artistic mission was the fact that he realized that the reality that we're all born into is completely constructed. And the fact that black people are in the position, yes?
Prince, he cast his mother as a white woman.
Well, not only that, he told Nelson George and other very early interviewers that his mother was Italian. She was not. She's from
Right.
She's
Louisiana, the projects of Louisiana and Minneapolis. She played basketball with her twin sister. She was a jazz singer in the clubs in Minneapolis who married a much older black man, 17 years older than her, who already had a family.
Well, this
But he
is
did
what-
it on purpose to
This is what
to
makes
fuck
him
with
hip hop.
people.
This is what makes Prince really hip hop, which is my whole point of that Rolling Stone article was the fact that, you know, even when we were like rolling our eyes in the air with the microphone gun and the gangster posing of the early '90s, Prince was more hip hop, and really I won't say the precursor of hip hop. I feel that he was hip hop. I mean, he came from the Midwest. He, some of our great wordsmiths in hip hop come from the Midwest. He told these tall tales to Cynthia Horner during his first years of talking at Ride On magazine, and like outlandish stories, backstories, keeping you wondering, keeping you guessing. I mean, he's responsible for the stickers on the records. That's hip hop. His work on with drum machines and technology, that's hip hop. Beef with Rick James, that's hip hop. He had his own vanity label, that's hip hop. He had his own posse, his own crew. He grew his own crops.
Camille.
Yeah, his aliases. He was rapping half the time on all those songs. Like, he was more hip hop than the point where he realized, I hate hip hop. Like, once the Black Album came out and he was mocking hip hop, he didn't realize that he was hip hop. And yes, unlike hip hop, he sort of highlighted the idea of what we call the ambiguous, exotic beauty. But I mean, that was early in his career. I mean, because we also have to acknowledge that, he embraced Marva Collins. She's in the most. I didn't even realize.
Yeah, I'm not taking it. I'm talking about at the point.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
when
like
you
at
would,
that
yeah.
point.
No, you're
Well, I mean,
absolutely right.
I mean,
there was a clear affinity for light skin, extremely light skin, or white, or sort of Latina-looking women. I mean, and you see this over and over and over. Vanity and Apollonia look almost
Sheenies,
exactly the same.
You got the look.
Kim Basinger, yes. I mean, on and on and on.
But
think
out
about
of a 40-year career, it was also the first 8. But we're sentimental to the first 10. So
And also
I'm not
think
killing
about-
it. I'm just saying. I'm just talking about that point.
But there's also some images of those very difficult images of domestic abuse in Purple Rain and so on. Which a lot of people, including myself, still have issues with whether or not the
Representation,
movie.
what you're talking about is right. Representation is important, and what Spike is saying is that, as a filmmaker, he knows better than any of us probably that the images that we're shown, particularly in a racist society, are going to help shape or continue to shape the way the society goes. So his concerns are legitimate. But I still feel that Prince's reason for doing all of these things was fundamentally subversive. I think that it was really conscious, and I think that once the society had shifted a little bit on its axis so that people were able to realize that a lot of the people walking around here today thinking they're white are not white.
Think also about
And that whiteness is a constructed category and is not real.
Yes, it is.
I mean, there's
That's
the
right.
there's the visionary, there's the sort of high-minded, or conceptual piece of that. There's also the strategic piece of that, that ambiguity. That's really, I mean, think about this incredible thing that he achieved with Purple Rain, which was making himself the biggest rock star in the world and only adding to the mysteries and the questions around him. That if this was somebody who knew the power of secrecy and mystery, and that people don't get sick of you if they always want to know something else
think
about
he would not
you.
attain that if he cast a black woman as a mother?
Well, I don't
think so.
But it's obviously was intentional that
I know.
he did it.
No,
I know it's intentional. It's not. You got to cast somebody. Of course, it's intentional. But people don't show up.
But the
you gotta
bigger-
cast somebody.
But the bigger
gotta
question
cast
is
somebody.
that was part of his success, that sort of mystery of like, ooh, we think he's mixed, ooh, maybe he's gay, ooh, all these
And
sort
to
of
get
things.
the rock and
And
roll kids.
Purple Rain is not
to-
an autobiography.
Right.
Is also
Absolutely.
That's but the way that he played with that what if this was true? I mean, that's all I remember talking
I
about.
mean, that's
What's
the-
real? Which of this is true? Well, what is it? What are his parents? Who's the, those were all, he was
And-
planning those questions to try to keep expanding the field he was playing on
And
and
that's-
get those rock and roll kids to think of him as a rock guitar player leading a band instead of this crazy R&B wizard making records on his own in a studio. I mean, that was all very, intentional and strategic.
And that too, Quest, is very rapperly, that he had this sort of story about his past that followed him, that defined him and who he was. I mean, even that family stuff, and even I look at Sister as like, Spider-Man. Peter Parker gets bitten by the spider and becomes Spider-Man, and his sister comes in and then he becomes Prince.
He mythologized himself, right? He was very strategic about that. All right, let's just quickly kind of move to the business aspects, and then we'll wrap up. But obviously, Prince was really strategic also about his use of the internet, and then also, very much what I've written about as a copyright maximalist, right? He was, very concerned about his copyrights and the way that they circulated on the internet and so on. And now, obviously, in his passing, it's a little bit of a different story. But what do we make of Prince and his relationship to the internet as somebody who kind of prefigured the rise of it and so on, and then somebody who's also very kind of controlling?
Visionary. Again.
Yes.
Well, yeah, visionary in terms of, I remember back when, when we were calling it the super information highway back in 94, 95.
Information super.
Or
Information super.
That's
Al
how
Gore.
I did. Right. I remember distinctly, what I've established with OK Player. I mean, now it's no big thing for an artist to live their life out on the internet, and a Kanye rant makes news, but 20 years ago that was unheard of. And back when I was looking for good examples of how to treat the internet, the only two artists that I saw, occasionally the Beastie Boys would come on their chat site, Courtney and Michael Stipe would go on their respective sites, but really Chuck D and Prince were like the pioneers of like
Ani DeFranco
Chuck D
too.
and Prince were the pioneers of like live blogging. Before we called it blogging, they would have these weekly messages.
They had a close relationship, Chuck D and Prince,
Yeah,
right?
they did. And for me, that's what I was looking at. So in 96, 97, when I was surfing the internet, they were the only two artists that that's how I patterned the modus operandi of what OK Player began. That was established as like a place where you can talk in real time to your fan base and your supporters. But then on the other hand, I'll say that that's probably his business side is probably the most frustrating aspect of him, at least personally for me, because just certain things like, until last night and last week, I'll say that last night and last week were the two fastest selling out bowl trains I've ever done at Brooklyn Bowl, where it's instantly sold out, line around the block, because of course people want a chance to mourn and celebrate his music. But previous to that, I was considering just doing my Prince sets altogether because of the absence of his music and his presence on the internet due to his request. The music really wasn't translating to a new generation. No matter how good it was like, we don't know this song.
Well, part of the problem is that he won that battle with Warner Brothers, right? That he was still making a song a day, wanted to put out as much as he wanted to. I want to do a double album. I want to do a triple album. And the label typically was like, whoa, slow down. Like, let's put out enough music that the people can consume it before you put out another one. And he won that battle, so he got to put out as much as he wanted to. But it's like, if you're...
I think he won the war. Did he win the battle? He won that war.
He won the battle.
And what did it do to him,
But
too?
what I'm saying is he lost the war in that there became so much music that even the fans were like, I can't keep up with all this music, and I think a lot of people dropped out of the journey. Just like, if your mom said, look, eat as much chocolate cake as you want, eventually you'd be like, you know what, I'm good with this chocolate cake, right?
Yeah.
Like the Brewster's Millions.
We're hearing Lauryn Hill now has done a deal too, right? Where you think, okay, now she's able to release music, or she's going to put music out, but what does this do to the person?
Well, I
right?
think
Like,
that-
what's the damage over
I
the
think
years of fighting with?
You Spike and Amir are both. I mean, when you think of it as business sense, it's visionary and it's frustrating. And there are some of these ideas that were so far ahead of their time. We were saying before, I mean, when he did the NPG Music Club or whatever it was, where you could subscribe directly to him and he would send out music when he. I still think that's an absolutely viable way that's not been explored enough in terms of ways for people to put their music out there. But he was so. He wouldn't give enough control. He wouldn't let other people make decisions. And so the fulfillment, he didn't even need an editor, just the fulfillment of those things got so screwed up. They didn't get handled right. The follow through wasn't handled right, where these things that would have really worked weren't given a chance to flourish.
The biggest thing for me, I think his biggest mistake was he's so on top of stuff. How can you not have a will?
Because no one thinks that they're going to check out in their 50s, so it's always hey, I'll handle it
Do
tomorrow.
you have a will, Spike?
I'll handle it
My
tomorrow.
wife made sure that she's a lawyer, so we get the
That's an
whole
outlier.
goddamn
It's
law.
married
We
to
get
a
the
lawyer.
will.
But maybe this is how he wanted to go in some strange way. I don't know. It's hard to say what.
But
what
good?
know. I mean-
What good could come out of not having a will?
Well, you know what? I forgot I had a will. When news of this came up, I called my manager up. I said, yo, maybe it's time I start doing a will. He's like, what are you talking about? You have one. I said, no, I don't. And then he showed me my will, and I was like, oh, I forgot.
But
Okay,
Spike,
cool.
the bigger thing there for me is that he died alone. There's no wife. There's no serious girlfriend. There's no children. We don't know who is the closest friend who would control this sort of thing. The Londell McMullen story has long been over. I mean, he died literally alone and figuratively alone.
He had sister. He had family. So it's not.
He was not close to his younger sister and
They're
his
close-
older
they're close
siblings.
now.
He barely knows at all. I mean, like, his parents are long gone. I mean, like, he did not have any sort of traditional family in terms of, like, people who were related to him, who were constantly there for him. And I mean, his Thanksgiving was not like, there's my sister, and they're like,
Well, these things remain to be seen.
I don't want to be too analytical of his life, especially when there are people in the room that are in his circle right now that are close to him, like family. But this is, again, that there's a beauty in that discipline and that isolation. You're not distracted, but then there could be a sadness in that level that also leads to mistrust and kind of arm's length, and people are slow to get into the circle. I mean, he had a circle. It's just that at the end of the day, he marches to his own drum, and I guess right now, history will determine whether or not that drum.
I mean, we talked about this, that and Alan Leeds talks about this, that he felt like he could not trust his mother. That he lives with his father as a child, he gets thrown out or he leaves, and he goes to his mother's house. And then some situation, he leaves his mother's house. And he can't trust his mother. And, I think we all know your father may or may not be there for you, but you think deep down your mother will be there for you at the end. And she was not. And so how do you trust anybody else in life when you couldn't trust her?
That's the common denominator with a lot of our
That's where his
soul
art
geniuses.
came from.
Yeah, a lot of our soul geniuses, James Brown, Ray
Miles.
Charles, Miles?
Miles?
Yeah, Miles.
Look at Marvin Gaye. His father murdered him.
Yeah, but in this case, we're saying that
I'm just saying
a mother's betrayal cuts deeper
parents,
cuts way deeper than a father. Half of hip hop lives by my father wasn't there for me, but
The thing about if you go back over the music now, so much of the lyrics are prophetic. I mean, if you look at the opening, the beginning of Let's Go Crazy, when he says, you're on your own. If the elevator tries to go bring you down, he dies alone in the elevator.
There is
The
so
elevator
much-
was the symbol
there is
for
so
the
much-
devil.
so much death in those lyrics going back. I mean, I realize now it's easy to look for that, but it's unreal. I mean, when you had D'Angelo on singing Sometimes It Snows in April on the show the other night, it's heaven and death and salvation. Like, it is there over and over again.
That song, like, we had a Questlove and I had something going in Brooklyn that night. We threw it together, and so for me, I've really tried to keep myself going by being joyous and celebrating life. But Sunday, that I was listening to a lot of his music when that song "Sometimes It Snows in April." That's when it really hit me. That I felt, the pain of the loss, because before I was just living in the music and all the joy it brought me. But that song, "Sometimes Rain and Sometimes It Rains in April," snows in April. I'm like, damn, it hit me really hard right there.
You guys, we gotta wrap. Time-wise, we have to wrap. I'm sorry, we're being told we've gotta leave the room, but I want to end on a powerful note if we can. And Anthony, since we have you here, I'm wondering if you and the Hamiltons might just sing us out a little bit.
Yeah. Until the end of time, I'll be there for you, 'cause you own my heart and mind, and I truly adore you. If God one day struck me blind, your beauty I still see, 'cause love's too weak to define just what you mean to me.
Anthony Hamilton, the Hamiltons.
Thank you.
Let's thank the entire panel: Anthony Hamilton, Kimbra, Questlove, Toure, Spike Lee, Alan Light, Carol Cooper. Be well, people. Jason King.
King, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Be well.